Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Under Construction. This is episode number 71, I think, off the top of my head. I'm not totally sure. We're here in Olive, of course. You guys know where we are. Not that we really have anything to do here. I've just been hanging around here a lot because I've been programming. You'll notice that I cleaned up the yard a lot. There's a lot less stuff hanging around in here. As for everything else, there really aren't too many major changes from last time. None of the engines have changed, and none of the track arrangement stuff have changed. There are just a lot more track marks than there once were. That's one of the biggest things. Anyway, we have to head out into the wild gray yonder and get some stuff done, because with all the programming, I've definitely had, the desire to get back to working again. Now, we still have this big chunk of area to fill in, and I kind of expect that it'll be a lot of the same. I don't really want to go down into Mason Valley or anything like that. I don't want to do any of that hardcore stuff. I'd rather just do some simple stuff. But as we've talked about, to do the simple stuff usually takes a lot of tree planting, and that's not something we can do on camera. So the smartest thing to do would be to start defining the edges of stuff, building, or putting on grass and stuff like that. But honestly, I don't care very much about what up here looks like right now. Call me callous, call me whatever, I don't care what this area looks like, although I feel like I kind of have an obligation to work on it, because I've worked on down there so much. I'm not 100% convinced about that. But it's worth saying, and I am going to fill in some green here just while I'm up here. So, yeah, most of my time this past, 2 weeks even, has been programming, which has been an endeavor. It's been a learning experience in a lot of ways. It's been trying to push the boundaries of what the game and the AI will let me do with them. And it's sort of like my first girlfriend. That's a joke. My first girlfriend was, my first real girlfriend. She, never mind, I won't go into that. But the AI are, sometimes difficult to convince with what you want them to do, which is different than her. Sorry. The whole thing has been, my limiting factor has been the fact that I don't have anywhere to stash new trains to come onto the route aside from staging, and of course staging is, it's sort of an enigma. It's kind of going to be a pain in the butt, and there are things that I have to change with it, and things that I have to change with, a lot of the way that things are right now, but on the whole, it doesn't really matter that much, because, again, I've got nowhere to stash trains coming the other direction. Off of the Gilson Eastern and off of the VMR, I can only stick so many trains up at the end of the line that need to come down, that need to come into the towns and stuff like that. This is, they can't just sit up there in a line, because there isn't enough room for that. And even the trains I have right now, I'm going to have to move them, later, when I get the opportunity to, when I have more route built that I can actually place them on, instead of having them sitting right outside of the town for a while. Now, I have come up with some other things, including, I don't think I mentioned this last time, including having a couple of through sleepers with the VMR and the Zion and Skyline, and Chris mentioned to me a few things, including how to properly use tank cars, because I had a few misconceptions about that. I was thinking of them more in a locomotion sense, where you can just sort of, empty one commodity and put one in. That isn't how that works. But the other thing that he mentioned to me is about having trains that, that sort of just go through. And I realized that yes, I will need these in some capacity at some point, as I've been thinking about them since then. But the fact of the matter is, I will run into exactly the same problem where I don't have anywhere to put them. And until we... So, I don't think any freights are going to be truly run through, aside from a few that are doing crude oil from the south of the map to the north of the map. South of the map is where most of the oil comes from, and the refineries tend to be in the north of the map. So, yeah. So we will have those which don't stop along the way for the most part. They just travel through. They're effectively unit trains. And, yeah, those will exist. But I can't just go and make those because I don't have anywhere to put them yet. Those trains in particular are ones that will be journeying all the way from all the way across the map on the Gilson Eastern. So until we have the entire Gilson Eastern built, there's nothing that I can do. I can stick them on the route somewhere, but the fact of the matter is they would probably be leaving early in the morning, but early in the morning, not like 3 a.m., probably more like 6, which is when the session starts. So then they're going to be all the way at the other end of the map. And in order to get from there to Olive, the area we have built, it will take some time, like significant time, several hours, I would wager. And, well, I would wager, I already know that. It's my map. But it will take them several hours to get from one end of the map to the other. And because of that, I can't just have them sit there for several hours, first of all. Second of all, I can't place them down at all, because they would be sitting there. Because they wouldn't be going anywhere, that's for sure. So, that's my biggest issue. And, there are a couple of spots where I could stick trains where I probably shouldn't. The other track on the bridge, for example, or in the Y at the summit for the VMR, or on the other 2 tracks for the Gilson Eastern, but they don't belong there. Yes, I will have to move the trains anyway, but I don't feel right putting trains somewhere that they just simply wouldn't be coming from. And maybe if I get that desperate, if I reach that point, then sure, maybe I'll do that. But for the most part, I don't see the necessity, and I don't really want to do it. So, more trains coming in that direction will have to wait. I did start making a new part of my spreadsheet that shows off, or that helps me calculate the amount of empties that need to be moved around. Because I'm doing everything in carloads of freight. Pretty much the entire spreadsheet runs on carloads of freight. And carloads of freight are only half the story. Ideally, less than half. Because you don't want to have to send empties around, because that's inefficient. But, for the time being, they are effectively half the story. So, until I can find something to, find some way around that. So, that means I was doing all my calcs without all the information I need, and I was planning these freight trains without all the information I need. And now that I have this, I'm going to be able to figure out, okay, so I have X number of, I have X number of freight cars available and this many that I use. This is how many I'm going to need coming from this direction and, going to this direction and that sort of thing. I have a tally of how many freight cars are on the map at the beginning and, sending them out and retrieving them, that sort of thing. I don't do it by time, I just do it by the whole day, because really, the only thing that matters is that there are the same number of freight cars in the home yards at the end of the day as there are at the beginning of the day. And by end of the day, I mean 6 a.m. Because, as has been described before, it is a 24-hour session. It's going to go all the way around the clock, come back, and start again. Ideally, when all the programming is done, one day will pretty much be indistinguishable from the next, so you can have a continuously running session, and you won't have to worry about a damn thing. Now, that's difficult, and one of the things that's making it difficult is kind of my fault, or is my fault, which is my propensity to name locomotives. And I don't mean name like, the Iron Horseman Chronicles. I mean name, like, all of the locomotives in order that in order for me to know which train they're on, have the name of the train or the designation of the train tied to them. Also, I'd like to talk about train designations in a second, because I'm getting into that with the different railroads. I'm not sure I talked about that last time. So, yeah. The trains have names like, GERR Train 201. And that's just a locomotive named that, because the driver just shows you whatever the name of the locomotive is that it's sitting inside of. And in order for me to tell from the driver window what train I'm looking at without, going back and forth a lot, I have to go and I have to name them like that so that, that's that. So that I can see very clearly, oh, this is train 200, this is train 201, this is train 205. That sort of thing. It helps me keep things straight. But at the same time, it's kind of a pain in the neck, because I know, and I haven't had to deal with this yet, but I know that when it comes time for me to set the thing up that produces all of the passenger trains, which it's going to be a series of portals that actually just produce once every 24 hours, and then everything's going to come out of the portals, 24 hours will go by, and then boom, it's going to be a whole nother line of trains. Now, I don't know if I should be downloading a custom portal manager rule, that sort of thing, because I've looked into it before very briefly, and it looks like it could be very helpful. I'm not completely certain if I need it, although if it has certain capabilities, that would be to load different cars individually, then it would make my life so much easier. So if you guys know about that, say something. But I personally don't know about those capabilities, or I'm not aware of them. I only just started playing with rules, which one of the ones that I deleted from the session, which I had from the very beginning, and you get just for, when you start a session, when you start making a session, you just get it in the list. And it's the derailment rule, or not the derailment rule, it's the delete derailed stuff rule. And it automatically deletes any derailed trains after a minute, so that you don't have derailed consists blocking your line. And it's handy if you're okay with things derailing. If anything derails on this map, that's bad news. And that means that I definitely did... Oh, you know why? You know why I didn't keep texturing past here? Because I need to do more trees. We're going to end the texturing here after I put some more grass down. We'll go texture somewhere else. Sorry, what was I saying? If anything derails, yeah, that's really bad news for me. That's something that I do not want to have happen at all. So, I don't need the derailment delete rule, because there will be, in an ideal situation, nothing for it to delete. But the real reason to get rid of it is not because of that, not because it's useless, but because it's a hindrance. And the reason it's a hindrance is because if something derails because of AI idiocy, I want to see it. I want to see it there and want to go, oh yeah, this derailed here because this switch was thrown under it, or this engine pushed things too far. Those are the two derailments, the two modes of derailment that we've had so far on this route with me doing the AI work. It's been either a switch throws back too quickly, which I don't know why that happens, but it does, and it's fairly frequent, apparently. A switch throws back too quickly, and the last two cars of the train go multi-track drifting and come off the track. It's either that, which was the first problem, or the second problem, which is a little bit more sinister, because it's the AI really being a son of a gun, not just something weirding out, and it's also exclusively my fault in reality, which is the misuse of a load command. Really the misuse of an uncoupling command, so an engine's pushing more cars than it's supposed to up to a short industry and a short track, and tries to load all of them by passing them all over the small industry and pushing them off the end of said short track one by one. Now, ideally, that can be corrected by, hypothetically, that can be corrected by adding some invisible track or rearranging your track or whatever. But ideally, that will be corrected by not carrying extra cars up to an unloading or loading point. Because Trains tries to load all of the cars in your train, no matter what they are, including the engine, when you go to load at an industry, it's really important to have as few things coupled as possible when you're going to load and unload at an industry, when you're sending the AI to do it. Part of the reason is so that they don't do something like that where they push too far, but the other reason is just because otherwise it's cumbersome, and because there's always the chance that a boxcar will take a commodity that it's not supposed to, and then you're stuck with logs sticking out of the side of a boxcar or something like that. Doing these things that really shouldn't be possible, but are, because Trains lets you get away with a lot of stuff, because if you really want to break the mold, you can. I was just playing around with signals on the turntable because the turntable started acting up again. The one in Olive, the only one that I really use, the only one that's actually got anything programmed going across it. Although initially the one in Mason's Landing had too. I had to scrap that train because I changed some things about it. And also that turntable is now basically irrelevant because the engine that would go on it is the engine that now goes to Mason's Landing. So that's not helpful either. Mason Valley. It goes to Mason Valley. The turntable's in Mason's Landing. I'm not sure if I screwed that up. But the engine running the Mason Valley turn is the consolidation that originally ran the Mason's Landing turn, and the reason that's significant is that I don't think there's going to be a place to turn around in Mason Valley, whereas, there's a turntable there in Mason's Landing for the express purpose of turning that engine, except it doesn't go there now. There's not much I'm really going to realistically do about that, because I can't get another good-sized engine to get in the roundhouse, at least not without having those two sort of hot bunk, which they're doing, that engine rather, the consolidation hot bunking with a, I guess it would be hot stalling, with a Berkshire, the one that runs the goods train down to there, because I'm going to need that Berkshire to go back the other way. And yeah, it's hot. Whatever. It's not a dedicated roundhouse stall for just that one locomotive. When the other one shows up, it gets to stuff in that roundhouse stall for a little while to get some, basic maintenance, lubrication, whatever needs to be done on that engine, because there isn't a lot of outdoor engine servicing there. You kind of have to take the engine into the roundhouse to get it serviced. There isn't any room outside. The roundhouse is sort of tucked in a spot where you're just not gonna get it otherwise. You're just not getting people out there to do that. There's nowhere to park that isn't blocking the roundhouse. Although it would be nice to have that. Maybe next time I design a roundhouse thing, I'll design some better engine servicing. To be fair, the one in Olive is not that bad. It's just really small. In fact, the engine servicing up top at the other one in Olive, at the VMR roundhouse, might actually be better designed, but I haven't had to use it yet because we don't have any freight trains on the VMR yet to come back around to that. But that consolidation is realistically one of the largest engines I could fit in there. The Berkshire sticks out. Not even like a sore thumb, it doesn't fit all the way in the engine house. It doesn't fit all the way in the stall. And, there's really no issue with that. I don't have it's not staying there overnight, it's staying there for a few hours. But that's sort of the thing. I can't fit anything bigger in that stall. I can't put the consolidation in any other stall, realistically, because I wouldn't be able to get it out of the roundhouse nor back in at the end of the day. Actually, I would be able to get it back in, just not out. But yeah, I wouldn't be able to get it out of the roundhouse, so I wouldn't be able to use it, so it would just be sitting there. And so I have to put it on the middle stall, and, because of that, then because of that, that's the only good-sized steam engine that I can have. And because of all those reasons. There's no way I can get another one there. I can get a Mogul, which isn't bad, but it's better for the branch line, which is what it's doing, as opposed to what it could be doing, which is anything else. I'm not having it switching. I have an NW2 for that, and the other switcher that was there, which actually did fit on the turntable, but only just barely. It was an 060, and it was actually really long. Probably kind of disproportionate, if I'm going to be honest. Is now moved over to Mason's Landing. Now, something that did cross my mind, because there's a lot of switching that has to go on in Mason Valley. Something that did cross my mind was the idea that maybe I should have a diesel station at Mason Valley, which would basically pick up the train. It would pick up the train from the consolidation and head out onto the branch line, because the branch line's relatively flat. It doesn't have to go very fast. You can have a relatively underpowered train out there and you wouldn't have a problem. Or, maybe even I would have them pair, and that way you'd have the steam engine's power, but when you get out there you'd have the flexibility of the diesel to actually switch. Having that consolidation switch would, I'm still planning on doing it that way, but it's kind of goofy. It's a little bit big to be doing that. And, and you guys can chime in with what you think as well. The issue is, if I don't send that consolidation out with that first train of the day, then I will not have a place to put the Berkshire when it comes in a couple of hours, or, in an hour or so. I won't have that space free. Oh, wow, I just went all the way along here. I won't have that space free, and because I don't have that space free, I don't know what to do with a Berkshire. The only other place I could put it is in the track to the side of the roundhouse, which currently is hosting the breakdown train. So I don't really want to get rid of that, because even though it's not going to be used, it's a really important set piece, to have something like that. And it would look kind of stupid out there. The other thing is, I could have another track for engine servicing, but I hid that track when I built the area, because there wasn't enough room for the second track. I'd have to sort of rearrange stuff in the Olive Roundhouse area, which is not something I'm interested in doing, really. I don't want to go back and change the stuff. I'll work with the constraints that I have. Speaking of working with the constraints that I have, I talked about my overload of cars, but I'm not sure. In the last episode, I talked about all the lumber I have to deal with. And A, I'm not totally sure what to do with it. B, I didn't account for some other things, and I may have done my math wrong, which may lead to another, a higher number of, a higher number of lumber than I'm expecting. Which means that I'm probably going to be running trains of lumber off the map to the south now, or the north now as well, because I need to get all that lumber out of there. So, it'll definitely keep the place busy. But if it starts to get really absurd, then I'll have to find other ways to provide general goods. So, there are plenty of ways I can balance this out and map this out. It's just, I would like to not spend too much time bending the universe to my will, even though it is totally my universe, and I'm well within my rights to do that, and more time just figuring out how to work within the constraints that I'm given. It keeps things a little bit more interesting, a little bit more spicy. Something I do need to look at. So I have this notepad over here where I did this math, and 5,000 wood chips is one good. This is where I did this math, and I just peeled this thing off by accident. So that means one log is 3/5 of a good. Yeah, It's 3/5 of a good. And 16 goods is 1 carload, and if we need 15 of those, we need 240 goods. And if a log is 3/5 of a good, I see where my math went wrong. Yeah, no, I don't need 144 logs. I need actually, I need 5/3 L times 240, which, if that's, yeah, I'm going to need a lot more. So 240 is, yeah, I'm going to need like 400 logs. Or, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, no, I said that right. Right? Didn't I? 3/5, that means a third of that is 80, because 80 times 3 is 240, because 8 times 3 is 24. Times 5 is 400. So, needless to say, I will have to find other ways of producing general goods, because that will produce not 72 carloads of lumber, but 200 carloads of lumber. And that is more. The thing that I'm neglecting, though, is the fact that there are other industries that are producing general goods. And that's sort of, I started doing more stuff with my old industry sheet and the commodity balance sheet and that sort of thing as I realized, more things that I can do with them. Ways that I can change them to make them a little bit more useful for what I'm currently trying to do. I think I'm going to leave this treeless. Yeah, let's tear out the middle here so that I don't start putting trees here. There we go. Crap, what was I saying? Yeah. So I realized my math error, or rather, I had suspected that I had made a math error, and ended up going to, ended up resolving it, quote unquote, but the resolution was me figuring out a way that current me had made a math error and not past me, which actually wasn't true. Past me had made the error, and that's what the problem was. So that means I do need more carloads of lumber, or I would end up with more carloads of lumber, which I don't want to do. I don't want to deal with that many. So I will have to find an alternate source for those goods, because remember, the only reason that we're doing this is because we're just trying to balance out the amount of goods that are coming in with the amount that are going out of the town. And, overall, the amount of goods consumed and produced over the entirety of the Tolbrin Peninsula. And if there are not, if that ends up being unbalanced in some way, shape, or form, then goods will come from somewhere else. Now, I don't think that, the easiest thing to do, I should say, the easiest thing to do would be to run carloads of goods from a major goods producer or a hypothetical major goods producer somewhere off map, and run it to the goods exchange in Gilson City to get changed into goods that are used over the map, which I may end up having to do. Which would not be that weird, because it just means that in some ways we have sort of a deficit of goods on the map, which, again, isn't weird. A lot of areas, most areas, perhaps, produce or consume more things than they produce. At least most areas in the modern world, modern cities and stuff like that. If it's a place with a lot of white-collar stuff, obviously it's not going to be a major producing area. It's going to be a center of business and legislature and that sort of thing, not an area of factories, farms, and other producer industries. So, factories, farms, mines, that sort of thing. If you have an area where, if you have a lot of these smaller towns which subsist on resources, then those are going to be the ones that are producing more carloads of things than they are taking in. Even if those carloads aren't goods, because, let's be honest, for the most part, those towns are not going to be self-sufficient. They're going to have to get something from somewhere. food, goods, whatever it may be. And, that's normal. So, yeah, I do want to have a balance of goods when I can, and Olive does have a lot of manufacturing in that regard, but I am limited by the amount of stuff that I can actually take out of the area. Stuff that's effectively byproduct. The lumber is all byproduct of the necessity to make goods. Now, in the future, that may not be the case, because I may find another way to get those goods, maybe from stuff that we already have, maybe from stuff that I have yet to build. Like the textile mill is probably going to produce a hell of a lot of goods. But, what was I saying again? But the thing with that is, but also, not only could we find another source of goods, we will probably find a draw for all this lumber, and not just the seaport, which, other than staging, is going to act as our sink for a lot of stuff. We send a lot of stuff out by ocean, and it isn't something that I'm going to try to fill the demand of, because that'd be extremely difficult. If you guys know the seaport I'm talking about, it's the default one. It's been built in for ages and ages and ages. And there are some things that I won't be fulfilling. Obviously, we don't use containers. But for the most part, it acts as a very good base and a very good sink for a lot of the default materials. So it's the kind of thing where even if it isn't the most beautiful thing, even if it isn't the most useful thing, I would prefer to use it because, well, like I said, because it takes a pretty much mind-boggling amount of resources to keep it stocked, and that just means we can feed it stuff and not worry about it. Feed Flintrock. But the other side of it is, the other thing that makes it important to me, is the fact that from when I was a wee lad, I always wanted to have a trains route that incorporated all these default industries. Sometimes you'd have a route where it's mostly coal and you can move some goods around, or you'd have the route that's all lumber stuff. I'm talking about like the built-in stuff, which isn't so prevalent nowadays because the built-in routes have gotten much larger and more extravagant, and they also are less focused on that sort of gameplay, at least as far as I understand. And they tend to use a lot of their own assets as well, is the other thing. But what I'm getting to is the fact that I've never been able to fulfill that goal. The Geiger Mountains Railway was a far cry from being there. It had some coal that was ostensibly going to be used to supply the engines, but I never really got that far. It had all the wood stuff. It had a lumber mill and a pulp mill and a forestry, and that was it, actually, I think. And other than that, it didn't really have much. And then I moved on to the Tamarell's Vale and Anaconda Railway, which was definitely my foray into, yeah, we're going to make everything, we're going to put it on a map, it's going to be nuts, it's going to be great. And that, well, you guys know where that went. And then we got to the Iron Horseman route, which was, as I've previously described, less of functional railroad and more of a series of set pieces strung together and pretending to be a functional railroad. I don't regret trying to do that, but it could have definitely undergone a lot more planning. I'll always have criticisms of the Iron Horseman route because it's so tied to me, and I know that things could have been done differently and things could have been done better. And despite the fact that we did come out with a product that I'm pretty happy with, there are plenty of things in it where I go, yeah, let's just not look at that too hard, or not think about that too much. Okay, we're getting somewhere. I'd said I wasn't going to work up here, and yet here I am. It's really more of filling in this gap here because we're almost at the edge of the the VMR here, and then maybe I'll come down here in a little while. I want to do something that wasn't texturing to start off the video, because I did spend the entire time last episode doing that texturing. Yeah. Need more water. But yeah, I forgot how to math, and I understated the amount of lumber I'm going to end up with. Either way, not particularly worried about it. It's a bridge that we'll have to cross when we get there, and though I do intend to start shipping lumber out as quickly as possible, it's the kind of thing where I know that, we're not going to be able to meet that quota, and if we don't, and when we don't, then I have other solutions. Again, including general goods coming from other places, such as off-map, or the sort of ancillary areas around Olive. Now, when I do all my maths, I tend to, or I do in this case, oh, you know what, I still need to talk about the reporting marks, but I'll get to those. I do build, or, I refer to the route as about 9 or 10 different places, sometimes fewer, because what the route is to me is a series of quote-unquote home yards, and this isn't a concept that the railroads would necessarily employ, but it is something that I'm employing for the sake of my own sanity and to make my calculations easier. And, the Gilson Eastern might do this. Other than that, I don't think the other railroads would, because it doesn't matter that much to them. They just don't have as much going on. But anyway, the home yard concept is sort of like the CSX, what is it? Is it CSX? The hub and spoke system, I think is what it was called, for intermodal stuff, where it goes to a series of centralized locations and gets distributed from there. Every town on the map has a catchment area around it, and usually that involves a bunch of, far-flung branches, industrial parks, smaller towns, that sort of thing. For example, well, for a while I was pairing Meridian, which is the island, the seaport, and Gilson City, which does make sense, but isn't something that's necessarily true or really helpful, because Meridian's going to have a lot of stuff going on, and I should probably refer to it differently, because I'm going to have to calculate the New Shoreham tramway moving cars back and forth between the island and the mainland. So I decided to stop doing that when I recently redid my spreadsheets. But right now the only quote-unquote home yard that we have on the route is Olive. And that means every single thing that we're dealing with is counted under Olive. Every car that we have, every load that's produced or consumed is effectively in Olive. And the rest of it I have to sort out. The rest of it I can do the math for, because it's relatively small scale, and I can keep track of it in my head or just with the trains a little bit more easily. So, it's not the worst thing in the world to be doing what I'm doing. And the key to it, the thing that makes it really helpful, is the fact that now I have all these centralized locations, and I don't have to worry about having a million different areas on my spreadsheet, for, one for each tiny town or location that we come across. So Mason's Landing and Mason Valley are both part of the Olive home yard. They're both part of the Olive catchment. And, like I said, that's totally on purpose. That's something that I did. That's something that I created. Because in order to make things a little bit easier, simpler, and more math-friendly, I decided to do that. Now, like I said, it's a little bit reminiscent, I think, of the CSX hub and spoke system, which is fine by me. It's not something that I'm trying to avoid, but it reminded me that at current, I'm trying to do a couple of things with regard to the differentness of the different railroads. So I don't know what this area is going to look like yet. I'll have to get to that later. Let's go to textures. The differentness of the different railroads, starting with different reporting marks for the different trains. And I don't mean reporting marks like GERR and that sort of thing, because we already have those nailed down. What I'm talking about is the train designations, the train codes, the, what do you call them? There are different names for them. But train number, train designation, that sort of thing. That's what I'm working on right now, and it's interesting. See, the Gilson Eastern is the one that I haven't changed. It's, a very modern sort of. It takes a little bit from Conrail and a little bit from other railroads and a little bit from just me, which is what I'm used to. It's the thing that I'm used to, and what that thing is that freight trains go from point to point. That would be a 2-digit acronym or, abbreviation for each town or location. So MV or ML or OL, that sort of thing. So that's that for the freight trains, and then a dash, and then the hour in which it starts. So we have GCOL-3 currently on the railroad. I think it's OL, although it may say JR or JF or something, but it should be OL. That's, Gilson City to Olive, 3 in the morning. And that's when it leaves. It's the early bird train. It gets out there to distribute some things before most of the stuff really kicks off. And the other one, and then the passenger stuff for that is not similar because it doesn't follow the same trend at all, but it's also just as straightforward. You have just straight numbers, and the odd numbers go south and the even numbers go north, and it increments by 1 for each train, and the different trains have different headers. So like a train 101 is a completely different kind of train than 201 and 301, but they're all heading in the same direction, or just 1, because we have trains like 1 through 10, something like that. They're the super expresses. They're really special. Then we have expresses on the north side of Gilson, expresses on the south side of Gilson, and then locals on the north and south side, and then trains that run through the whole way, local. It's the kind of thing that I'm dealing with, I'm figuring out as I go along. Now, the thing that made me really think was that that's a fairly sophisticated and modern system. It's not, too outlandish. You don't need a code breaker to read it, but it is what it is. Now, there are some systems out there in real life that you do kind of need a code breaker to read. CSX, in reality, has a fairly... Is it CSX or is it Norfolk Southern? That has a fairly opaque way of telling their trains, where it's like just 1 letter and 3 numbers. Something like that. And, Agilities, if you're listening, feel free to add your 2 cents, because I know you know a lot about these kinds of things. But I wanted to emulate that, and so I picked a railroad that might actually be able to do that, and that's the Zion and Skyline. Zion and Skyline has a very, sort of out of left field system like that. And you've got a letter, which designates the type of train, and then 3 numbers, which designates something that I haven't figured out yet. So, yeah. I'll expand more on that when I actually start making Zion and Skyline trains. It's going to be a while before I do. The next thing is, the only other railroad that I've cared about so far, no offense, New Shoreham Tramway, I love you, but I'm not there yet. And you don't really have a lot to brainstorm on, because I just have no idea. I don't have any idea how that's going to look or that's going to be. So, anyway, the other railroad that I've been thinking on is the only other railroad on the map. That'd be the Volga Mountains Railroad. And the thing that's special about that is they have a very, very, very dated way of doing their trains. It's a 2 or 3 digit number for every single train. It does not change no matter what. There's no letters on there or anything. And I say no matter what, but I mean that's just how it is. It's a 2-letter, or it's a 2 number or a 3 number, or a 2-digit number or a 3-digit number. It's one of those two. If there's something weird going on, you might see like a B or an E tacked on the end, or an A, or something like that. But for the most part, no. It's just 2 or 3 digits. And the first 2, or the first 1, depending if it's 3 digits or 2, is the hour that the train departed one station. Or, the hour that the train started. That it left its first stop. And headed out onto the line for the first time. So hour of the day, 1 through 24. Okay? And then the third number, or final number, the second number, if it's a 2-digit number, is the is just a sequential number. So the first train to leave going northbound, because northbounds are odd for them, the first train to leave going northbound or wherever, and I might actually drop that requirement because, because why bother? But for the time being, I'll still say so. So, trains going northbound are odd number, and the first one to leave after 6 in the morning, the first one to head out onto the entire system, no matter where it's coming from, is going to be train 61. And then the second one to head out in that same direction, no matter where it's heading from, as long as it's still going north, is going to be train 63. The first one that goes south is going to be train 60. And the second one that goes south is going to be train 62. And, that sort of thing. And if a train splits, perhaps then you have a 62 and a 62B. Because now you have part of this train that's going off in a different direction. If you have more than 10 trains that leave in an hour, then it rolls over, and you have like train 70 being the 11th train that hour. Which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but the system is very old and it gets a little bit overwhelmed with a modern volume of traffic. It kind of breaks down, but it doesn't really matter because they're just train numbers. And most of the time the dispatcher will know what train it is, either by memory or by looking it up very quickly in a very old book that has not changed very much in many years. So, yeah. Those are my thoughts, and yeah, I'm probably going to drop the north-south requirement for Volga Mountain trains, although I may keep it on a little. It's just that it's probably going to cause overwhelming very quickly, especially, because if more than 5 trains go in the same direction within the span of an hour, which I get that's probably kind of unlikely, but if more than 5 trains do, then you're going to have to find another number. Then you've run out of numbers already. So that's a fairly low bar. I don't like that. I would like it to be a little bit more flexible. So I might just number them by 61, 62, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, etc. Not, what I described a minute ago. Still on the fence about it. Again, I'll probably keep it, but only in a limited capacity, and I'll be willing to basically ignore it if necessary, or whenever necessary, because it certainly will be. I expect. Or I might just ignore it altogether because it'll give a little bit more sense. Although maybe I don't want that. So, yeah, I do want their numbering system to be very opaque. In that you really can't tell what train it is unless you know what train it is. At least if you see like a, P060 on, which is a total placeholder number, I don't know what the number would actually be, but P whatever, on Zion and Skyline, it's a passenger train. And a C is still a passenger train, it's a commuter train. And so that's just the way it is with that, so you at least know what's coming at you, and what sort of priority to give it as a dispatcher, hypothetically speaking. But on the VMR, it's just like, yeah, it's a train. There's a train coming. And it's probably going to be like, well, uphill trains yield priority to downhill trains. Or vice versa, I should say. Downhill trains yield to uphill trains. That sort of thing. That's probably all it's going to be. It's going to be very rudimentary, very simple, because the railroad is that way. The railroad is marred by internal strife and, clinging to the past for no good reason in a lot of cases, and sometimes just not good reasons in a lot of others. So, yeah. It's going to be interesting and probably quite fun figuring all that out and writing it down and stuff like that. The thing that I know is, because it's so much of a pain to change things sometimes, especially when you have something already programmed and now you can't really fiddle with it because you'll have to program it again, and that could take hours and a lot of troubleshooting. I think that, once something is said and once something is in the map, it's kind of set in stone. Now, of course, I can change what I'm saying, but once I build a train and I follow what I just said, then, all bets are off with changing it. I really can't do anything with it. I have to, just deal with it. And that's why I wanted to change these before I get too far along. I already have 2 VMR trains, and I did go in and change them. So they are, they do fit the current schedule, although I did have to guess for one of them. Or really kind of both of them, but, whatever, it happens. But, at any rate, that's, I wanted to get that out of the way before I got too deep into it. There's going to be a lot of stuff where I'm certain that I'm going to get to a point and go, I should have changed this way back then. And that's why I'm glad that Chris pointed out my mistakes with the oil cars, among other things, before I was too deep into programming that train. Currently, the oil train has all of 5 commands, and, nothing else interfaces with it. It just exists. It just is, and so are we. So, I mean, that's my story. That's all my programming stuff for the last couple weeks. It's been the olive branch, it's been the olive yard, and that's really been it, because playtesting it, if you can call it that, just simulating it is what I've been calling it, takes a couple of hours, and in fact now it takes a full 3 hours before the simulation reaches a point where I don't know how it will go. For the most part, it's pretty reliable in the first 2.5 hours. There are some things I need to change that I just wrote down, because right before this I was wrapping up a simulation that didn't go all the way through because I wanted to get on with this and, build some scenery. But the fact of the matter is that, for the most part, the beginning of the simulation goes pretty smoothly. At least it does right now. There are some things that I will likely have to change or decide to change in the future that may ruin that, and one of the things is the number of cars stored in Olive Yard. Now, that's an issue because the AI can be kind of finicky when switching and driving towards an existing cut of cars, as I've found out on the Olive Branch. Sometimes they'll just outright refuse to do it. They won't drive in that direction at all, even if they're protected behind a signal or something like that. So, yeah, it's interesting. It's a pain in the neck, but again, with the working with what you've got, I've been learning to figure out how to work around these issues, or how to even work with them in some cases. So, the Olive Branch has one run through that works fine. The Olive Yard has a couple of good switching moves and a few industries that get switched out now. It's, I say a few, I do mean exactly 3 industries get switched out. But the thing is, that is just the beginning, and it does, it is prone to goofing up if I screw something up, especially when a locomotive reverses direction and then the whole train is counted from the other end. And I'm trying to use uncouple commands, and it's uncoupling from the caboose instead of the engine, and that sort of thing. that has been a very prevalent problem. And the other thing that I'm running into, other than the won't drive towards a set of cars thing, is the idea that a train, or, the AI's ideas of... Oh, crap. I lost it again. What? Something. One of the other issues that I've been running into is what? Survey says... I don't know. What else have I been running into? Other than a coupling at the wrong end. Sometimes I'll miss track mark, or the engine will miss a track mark. That happened once, and it sort of drove off onto the VMR. Getting the engines out of the roundhouse has been a perpetual pain in the neck, because sometimes that issue will just crop up with no warning, with no reason, and I'll have to, redo some stuff to get it happy again. There have been some issues with timing of trains on the main line, which is kind of an issue. It's really kind of a pain, because it's like, okay, what am I going to keep an eye on? Am I going to watch the, am I going to watch the train that I know works properly and just check the time when it gets to this destination? Or am I going to watch the one that I'm concerned about? And the thing is, these two things might not happen for, 2 hours apiece. I think I mismathed or miswrote something down when I, timed the original train out to Mason's Landing. So the time that I have listed for travel time to and from Mason's Landing is absurdly long. It's like 10 minutes longer than it needs to be. It's like 27 minutes. When realistically it only takes about 20 tops. And that's with disturbances, and that's even on the local tracks. So the the express tracks are faster, and all of the passenger trains, and I do mean all of them. I moved one to the local track for a time, but I moved it back because it wasn't worth it. It wasn't really improving much, or improving anything for that matter. The express tracks are faster. So, obviously, it's going to be better just to keep your passengers on the express tracks at all times, because for the most part, they're still going to be traveling at the highest speed that they can. Whereas, if you put them in the local tracks, sure, they'll be traveling the speed limit, but on the whole, they'll be traveling slower than if they had been on the express tracks from the start. So, even though there is a point where an express leaves staging like 7 minutes after a local, and so ends up sort of stuck behind it because it's very close ahead of it. It stops at the station, but then it pulls out in front of it and, does its thing there. The only thing I can think of is maybe I should move the express up. What? Maybe I should move the express, up maybe just a couple of minutes. And that's, and that will be fine. That will solve the problem, because then it will pass it while it's stopped at the station in Olive. And I've tried that, and I also tried, like I said, moving it on the express, or moving the local onto the local tracks, or onto the freight tracks, because, with the hope that a train, or, the trains will meet at some point, the express will catch up to the local train before the next interlocking and get by it. That didn't happen. That needs some more schedule tweaks. But that was what my first thoughts initially were. I think I might just leave it as is, although, like I've said, I do need to change the timing on the local train because it gets to Mason's Landing way earlier than it needs to, or, at the very least, the command to leave is way later than it needs to be. And I think that second one is the easiest, well, it's the easiest thing to change for certain. But that's probably the one that I'm going to go after. Wow, that's a big gray area. We'll get to that later. Sooner or later. And yeah, that's my thoughts right now. It's going to take a lot of tweaking. It's going to take a lot of shifting stuff around. Again, I don't have a lot of freight trains on the system, so I'm not sure how they're going to interact, if they're going to even interact properly or what, if they're going to, cause major issues with the schedules of the passenger trains. There are already issues where, I wouldn't call them issues, but instances where freight and passenger trains have very close schedules to one another, and so you see a lot of competition at interlockings sometimes for those spots. Yeah, I don't know. It's definitely going to be interesting. The thing that I like about it so far, though, is that I could probably pile a ton of trains onto the system even as it stands, and as long as they're programmed correctly, the system will sort them out. The system will determine the order. And, through interlockings, through stations, that sort of thing, the only issue that I could see, really, is if two trains try to approach a small single-track station like Mason's Landing, from opposite directions at about the same time. It's not going to happen. They're not going to be able to both get into the station. We're going to have gridlock because one of them won't be able to get out, and one of them will be stuck on the way in. So that is something I have to look out for, but I'm not overly concerned about it because most of the trains really shouldn't be stopping at Mason's Landing. Right now, I have all of them stopping at Mason's Landing, all of the local ones heading in that direction, except for the long-distance local, which isn't too weird, but on the whole, probably not that realistic. It's a very out-of-the-way stop. It doesn't have a lot of people, and I don't know, it's not a big deal. I may still keep the 2 or 3 trains that I'm having currently stopping there, but in the middle of the day, there's going to be no reason for a train to stop in Mason's Landing. It's going to carry right on through. So, yeah. You got to judge that. And there are some other stations that I have marked down as yes, definitely stop here, or no, absolutely don't stop here for certain trains, and I'm changing that around as time goes on. For example, there's a train that's currently powered by FL9s, which I found on the download station. They're very, very nice. And it's, I needed to justify the existence of the FL9s. So the answer would be, well, it's because there's third rail somewhere in Gilson City or on Meridian Isle or something like that, and I thought, yeah, Meridian Isle could work because, I don't know, New Shoreham Tramway would really handle most of the passengers out to Meridian because they own all the track. But having a run-through train from somewhere very distant, especially for individuals that are taking a boat somewhere from the seaport, would make a lot of sense. So, maybe I will do that, and I may move it to a different point in the schedule, because it doesn't really make sense that the boat train leaves at 5 in the morning. It'd probably leave more during the day, but, maybe, maybe not. I could definitely see it leaving at 5 in the morning, because it has to get all the way out to Gilson City, and then the boat has to go wherever. Although, boat doesn't really care if it's traveling in day or night, so, maybe I would have the boat leave in the evening, and I'll have the train with FL9s come in the evening as opposed to first thing in the morning. I really just wanted to see those FL9s out and about. They're beautiful. I can't state that enough, and they're on the DLS, and all their stuff is on the DLS, and it makes me very happy. So, anyway, this is a very interesting area. I would like to have as much of this done up with one texture first, and then the next texture, and then the next texture. It should take me less time to do it that way than doing it really any other way. So, I think this might be the best thing to do. But that means I have to decide on the spot what each area is going to be. For the texture, I don't really get to come back to it. So, if I end up hesitating too much, then I'm going to end up kind of wasting time, really. I need to move this window over. Alright, now I can see how much time we have left on the episode. Which is about an hour for those of you playing along at home. Speaking of playing along at home, No, I do not have another officially released version of Tollbrand on the download station. However, if you know me on Skype, which you can cut to me at bombs321 on Skype, and as long as you don't immediately start speaking Russian, I will be more than happy to talk to you. And if you would like, if you get in contact with me, I may share you the most recent copy of the route, AI and all. I'm not really opposed to that. It's just the kind of thing where I'm hesitant to hand out copies of the route too freely right now, mostly because, I mean, not only are we balls deep in the alpha period of the route, but the fact is that these versions that I'm producing are very much test versions. I produce alpha versions, good alpha versions like 2.0 or 2.2, whichever one is on the download station, when I feel like, yeah, we're good. I've made it to a place that I'm happy with other people checking out and playing with and showing off. Now, right now I'm not really at that place. The AI has developed a lot, and I'm very proud of what the AI is able to accomplish right now. But on the whole, the map is a lot of gray, and while I'm remedying that as we speak, it's a very slow process, as you know. And I don't really like showing off the route with this much gray on it. Obviously, I make a series with it, so I'm not that shy, but the fact of the matter is, that's a little bit different than than handing out something which, I know it doesn't say finished product on it, but when you hand somebody something, you expect to get something that isn't broken. And not only is it rough in appearance, there are definitely things with the AI that I do break from version to version. And that definitely has a lot to do with just however they decide to work, or whatever minor change that I made that peeves the AI off, and that I don't realize because I haven't run a test yet. I've made a change, I've saved the version, I've gone, alright, this one's good enough, because I fixed the AI, and then I fixed a couple of other things with signals or whatever. Not thinking that, oh yeah, obviously the signals are going to really disrupt the AI. This one little change I made to an interlocking tower is really going to screw up the AI. The AI isn't going to be able to get where it needs to go, and basically my session will not work right. I've made that mistake before, and in fact, I gave out a version that's 0.2.40. I know, a lot of versions. Which I was happy with because I was like, here, check out the AI. But I am fairly certain I broke the AI immediately before handing that out. I don't know, I don't quite remember, but there are definitely things that I noticed shortly thereafter, which I don't know if those things were included in 0.40, or if I induced them shortly thereafter, if I caused them, right afterwards, and I'm just, I'm not thinking, I just think that, the two sort of go together. So, I don't know. I don't know what I did. I don't know if it's good or if it's bad. I don't know who's downloaded it or who's played on it. I haven't heard from anybody. But it was out there, at least to my group of friends, and anybody that asks can have this version, which is 0.4.42, which has some issues of its own, but works a little bit better and has almost 3 hours of automated session. So, I don't know. It's up to anybody that actually wants to get in touch with me about it. And the thing is, if you're going to go and you're going to do that, there are things that you might want to look at, or, things that you may look at and say, hey, you should work on this. Now, that is something that I'm surprisingly quite happy about. Because if somebody says, hey, work on this, then I'm very obligated to work on that. And I am going to work on that exact thing and not anything else. Now, I'm telling myself to work on this area now, which is a son of a gun, but is going to bridge the gap between the scenic area and the non-scenic area, which is up this way. Now we do have the swamp filled in, so this looks relatively minute, and this is mostly trees. But this area is the real difficult and detailed part. And, I kind of wish I didn't go into this kind of detail with it, but the fact of the matter is that's just the way it is. It came out rocky like this, so it's going to be rocky like this. So, the other thing is, I've been expanding my fleet of cars. Now, cars and engines and things like that, every time there's something that I think might be on the download station, I go on like a downloading tear. Whether or not the things that I inevitably download are related to that initial thing that I wanted, really depends on what I find. So, I downloaded all those New Haven coaches recently because I was looking for some coaches, and at the same time, I ended up downloading FL9s and a ton of electric engines, just because they were also New Haven and they were also there. So, I happened to stumble across them and I downloaded them. I also downloaded a number of Train Boy things, because he makes some good steam engines, but unfortunately a lot of them do rely on Ben Neal assets, and therefore I can't use them. Which is a shame. I very much like his steam engines, and I very much like Ben Neal's steam engines just as well. The other issue is people do upload Ben Neal's dependencies to the DLS sometimes. That's not something that he wants you to do, first of all. Second of all, that doesn't help me, because even though they're on the DLS, they are not, They're not linked to the other things, because they're under different QIDs. So, they don't help me either. They don't help me twofold. And there's nothing I can do to change that, because if I were to go in and change the QIDs in the QID table for the DLS Mikado I have, for example, or the many DLS Mikados I have, that are formerly Ben Neal, or that are reskinned Ben Neal engines, the issue becomes then those become modified and then I can't use them. So, it's kind of a pain in the neck. I really wish there was a decent Mikado out there that I could use, but unfortunately, there is not. Some people have uploaded stuff. If anybody knows of a Mikado with all of its assets on the download station, I will name a dozen things after you. I don't care what it takes. If you tell me, I owe you, because I need a Mikado. I don't have one. I have a Decapod, which is the old Ivan model. I have a Mogul, which is the old Lee model, or well, current Lee model still. It's just not reskinned. I have a bunch of Hudsons and some Pacifics, which are all quite nice. And I have a couple of Northerns, one of which is pretty good, and I have a Berkshire as well. But other than that, I don't have a whole lot. And I'm rattling off these kinds of engines, but if you think about it, I'm basically building a world full of engines. And what the hell was that? And that means that I need all different types, and I do not have all different types. I hardly have any freight engines. The Berkshires are the closest thing I have to them. I'm using the mountain types for passenger service because they're better suited for it than Berkshires with a four-wheel leading truck. And yeah, that's where I stand. What else locomotives do I have? I have an 060. I have a couple of those. I have a Mogul. I have some Jeeps. I have some RSs. I have a bunch of Alcos, actually. I have RS3s, and I have an RS11. That's New Haven. I just found a bunch of Fairbanks Morse stuff on the DLS, which is really nice, because I needed some of that. I have some other diesels. I have an NW2, like I mentioned earlier. And, like I said, some Jeeps. I have some, not shark noses, but I have centipedes. And, crap. What are the other diesels that I have out there, other than the FL9s? I have F units. I have Alcos of the passenger variety, so I have PAs, I also have FAs, and I don't know. I have a lot of things, I just don't have enough. There's not enough of a variety, even though I have tons of stuff. It's just not there, it's not good enough. Alright, let's go with the brown now. So, yeah. I mean, I'm not going to complain too much because the download station is the download station. I'm getting all this stuff for free, and I can use it in multiplayer stuff. It's, you know, I'm accepting of the limitations of what I have and what I can do. It's just frustrating how many Mikados are there that seem like they're there and they're just out of reach because they have one or two assets that I cannot use, or it's the bogeys or whatever. You know, it's a real shame that that's what it comes down to. But currently it's kind of a fact of life. I had to go out and find the F units I'm using, not like they were hard to find, but I had to go and find F units to use because most of the Gilson Eastern freight trains are going to be pulled by Mikados, and, well, you know what comes next. I don't have any. So, I'll probably have to cut back on the number of Mikados I'm supposed to have, and up the numbers of F units that I do have. So, yeah. That's, you know, I have to make these kinds of sacrifices, but that's just the way it's going to be. And I don't want to reuse the same engine over and over again, although with the Volga Mountains Railroad, I am intending to use the mountain type that I have for every single passenger train that goes on the main line. The reason for that being, we have 50 of them. And they were commissioned, you know, they were ordered exclusively to supplant basically all other passenger road locomotives on the entire VMR. And, you know, mainline passenger locomotives, not passenger road locomotives. And, you know, the reason for that is, you know, relatively obvious, I would think. They are relatively powerful but compact engines, and they can muscle those trains up the hill at, you know, reasonable speeds without needing a helper, which adds a lot of time to passenger train proceedings, as it were. You don't want to have to be spending all that time hooking on and then unhooking helpers when you need them, if you don't have to. So that was my goal with using the mountain types for that, and that was their goal as well. As for freight trains, I have not looked into how AI do with attaching and detaching their locomotives to one another, but we will have to find out. We will have to find out sooner or later. And part of it might end up being more like, I have the drivers hopping locomotive to locomotive if I can get it to do that, which is another issue. So, you know, how I'm able to accomplish that remains to be seen, but I know I will find a way. Even if it involves playing around with the rules. Now, speaking about playing around with the rules, so the other rules that I've found, the other rule that I've taken a fancy to, is the one that displays a message window. Not because I care about displaying a message window, but because it has an interesting side effect. That side effect is it pauses the game, which is awesome. Well, you can have it do that. And so, if you make it a child rule to some other rules, like a wait, or like a wait for trigger rule, then you can have it so that your trains go and go and go and go and go on their own for, you know, say 2 hours, until one hits a trigger on an area that hasn't been tripped before. So there is one trigger that only gets tripped once in the entire session, and it's right about when, quote-unquote, the problem stuff begins, which is what the message says, for the Olive Yard switching engine, which is the NW2. And because of that, I set this thing up so that I could set it to play, and I did this last night. I tested it. I started the session, went to bed, and then came home from work, and it was waiting there, paused, saying, "This is where the problem section begins." It worked excellently. And I am very happy about that, because it means that I don't have to, time it right, or be accountable for it, or pay attention to it for the first X amount of time, or whatever. And I can set it to other things. Like I said, I can set it to amount of time. I can make it wait 2 hours exactly and then pause it. But this is a little bit more spot on to what I need. So the other issue is if a trigger gets triggered more than once during a session, then I'm going to have to either have it wait, or then wait for a different trigger, and then that trigger, that sort of thing. I'm going to have to toy around with it a lot, but I think that it'll be good enough in the end for me to do what I want to do with it, which is have it help me in getting to the right spot to take notes. And that's not me exaggerating. I do take notes. I have a notepad right next to me right now that when the AI gets to a certain point, when it gets to the point where I haven't checked or am, leery about, I'll whip out the notepad and I'll start getting ready to write down anything that comes up that's an issue. For example, it uncouples from the wrong car, which it did earlier, which I need to change. Or it doesn't wait before uncoupling, or it, drives too far past an industry, or, whatever. I did the track marks in the wrong order, so it's driving over to the other side of the yard. Or optimization things like, I can have it stop at a closer track mark instead of driving to the end of the yard lead, and then coming back. It's the kind of thing where there are many, 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 many things that can go wrong. And so, stopping it every time one thing goes wrong means that you're never going to get anything done, because guess what? Your code's not going to be perfect on the first try. It never is. You might get lucky once or twice, and it might work, but you shouldn't trust that. And you shouldn't trust yourself to write perfect code. Also, due to the fact that, with the trains changing heading and stuff like that I mentioned earlier, so it's uncoupling from the wrong end, that is something that is fairly unpredictable in my experience, and it happens regularly. So if a train swaps direction at some point in its schedule, it will always swap direction at that point in its schedule. If you can figure out what point it is, you can probably have it swap it back and then carry on your way. But the easiest thing to do is just acknowledge that and say, okay, from this point forward, then I'm going to be uncoupling from the other end. I'll be counting from the other end of the train. The easiest thing to do once you have it all programmed is just to swap out the uncoupling commands that are an issue. Because having it change train heading can lead to all sorts of other fun issues. Like the train driving the wrong direction toward the track mark because it thinks it's facing the other way. That sort of thing. It's bizarre. That sounds completely outrageous, but it happens because the AI is just not that smart sometimes. Sometimes it can be very clever, though. Sometimes the AI totally surprises me with how it figures out how to solve a problem, or the protections that it gives itself in order to not run into another train. That sort of thing. It is impressive. At the same time, though, you should not have a situation where the AI has to figure something out for itself. And this is something that I learned. This is something I did not want to accept. but I now accept it, and I realize that, of course, that's the way it's going to be. This is the way things will work. And I just have to, I have to build things to be robust and not rely on the AI. See, originally, I went through great pains to try and set up the main line so that slow trains would be able to actually pass fast trains. Or sorry, other way around. Fast trains would be able to pass slow trains given the opportunity, if they noticed the opportunity. And that's really the issue. There was no way for them to really notice it, and there was also really no way for them to pick the right direction. I started having issues with interlocking towers where the towers would not assign paths to trains because the trains couldn't really figure out what path they needed. So, I fell back on the ITE, the Advanced Interlocking Tower, or the EIT, sorry, and the EIT and the ITS set path command. So, what that lets me do is have paths that the AI selects because of a command and not because it thinks it needs to go this way. The tower is not assigning a path to the train because the train is telling it where it needs to go. The train is just telling the tower, hey, I need this path. Let me go. And, the tower responds. The tower actually works pretty flawlessly under those circumstances. There is not an issue that I've had with the set path command. At least not a regular issue. And the issues that I have had are generally, always, due to user error. So it's myself misprogramming something. And, either it selects the wrong path or it doesn't select a path because I left out the command by accident. That sort of thing. I've had a lot of instances where trains pull up to an interlocking and then they get stuck there and I see the little notification that somebody's stuck, so I go over and there's no path selected and I go, why is there no path selected? And that's when I realize, oh, it's probably because I didn't select one. Or I didn't have the AI select one, and so I go through and I make it do that. I think we're getting better at this, but I'm not totally certain. So, yeah. If you guys have questions about the AI, feel free to put them down in the comments. I can try to work out a lot of things, although it's really just a lot of trial and error and figuring out weird solutions, and a lot of Googling and reading forum posts and things like that, which are sometimes very helpful and sometimes very not helpful, because it's a lot of people sometimes repeating the same question in different words, and nobody really answering it. And then the thread goes dead, and that's the end of the world. That's the end of it. So, there are definitely some things which are pretty much impossible that I don't know how you would fix, which, one of them is the turntable issue, getting the train to go all the way onto the turntable when there isn't a track on the other side of it. They just, they refuse to pull up to the end of the track, and I don't think there's a way around that. I highly doubt that there is. That's something that the AI is just, the AI does. The AI will refuse to get that close to the end of the track. Unless it's trying to load, apparently, in which case it'll push the whole train off the end of the track without a second thought. But, yeah, that's one of them. Things have been acting weird around loaders and unloaders, particularly loading coal and water into an engine. I don't know totally if that's a big issue, or, what's necessarily causing that. Although I do recognize the fact that it may have something to do with weird speed limits and speed signs, because the 5 mile per hour speed limits tend not to work great. Engines sometimes, or always really in my experience, tend to roll over them without actually slowing down. Like their limit doesn't actually change. So, I don't know why that is. Maybe if I replace them with 10 mile an hour speed signs, things would be different. But that's something around the roundhouse that I don't really want to fiddle with because I just got that working again, and I don't want to break it. The thing that I can think of doing is sort of getting around that by having engines pull up to where the water and coal would be, and then using an instant load engines command to, get that out of the way. The other thing is, or the other potential thing is using those water towers and stuff like that, although the water tower doesn't really matter. Using the coaling tower as just a coal consumer, so it constantly sucks down coal with no care to who's underneath it, that sort of thing. But I don't think I really want to do that. I think I will just, have there be a car of coal at some point that they load under there, and that they load under there, and even though it doesn't dump anything because they're not, the engines aren't actually picking up coal from there, it's, it then gets treated as an empty car and shipped off map. Instead of back to where it would belong so that it doesn't screw things up, the calculation-wise, it just gets shipped off map. So, that's what I'm doing with extra commodities in order to ensure that, industries that only do, like, semi-full carloads, that sort of thing, industries that have that issue, instead of dealing with semi-carloads and that sort of thing, what I'm doing is I'm just rounding up for the, for those industries, and the excess gets shipped off map. Also, I round up in general, because if there is a partial carload, it's still going to take one full car. So that's what really matters. That's the big issue. I do have to pay attention to if I'm shipping a partial carload to another location with a, that only takes, that takes a full carload, but they look the same on the spreadsheet because they both just say 1. Then I'll have to supplement it another way. I can't just do that, because then one industry is going to run out of something. Now, that doesn't really matter. Again, in the grand scheme of things, it will take more than 24 hours to run out of anything. My theory, or the way I approach multiple industries with the industry sorting, or with the industry, like commodities and stuff like that, is I have the queue, which is how much they can store, hold 200% of what they produce or consume in a day. And I make it start half full. Everything starts half full. So, that means that you have a industry that is always producing, pretty much no matter the circumstance, but does need a refill once a day, which is, how it's supposed to be. The only thing I don't do with those, or the only thing I avoid, or the only industry I don't do that with, is the default industries, because those are more of a filler than they are an actual industry on the map. They may be large, sort of large set pieces, but I'm only going to have the, forestry, for example, produce as many logs as we need the forestry specifically to produce. Everything else is producing a set amount. The log transfer produces like 10 carloads. That's, and that's that. That's how much that it makes. It does not make any less or any more. It starts off with 50 logs, which is, it starts off with 100 logs, I guess. And during the course of the day, it produces 100 logs, and it could store 200. So, you show up with a train, you pick up 100 logs at, over the course of the day, that sort of thing. I'm not sure if it's 100, it might be 50, so that'd be 5 carloads. I don't know off the top of my head, I don't remember. But, either way, you're picking up these logs from there, and it doesn't matter what time of day you show up, as long as you show up once in the 24 hours. It's going to be full. It's going to have a full set of carloads of logs, no matter when you come around to pick it up. And I had this issue with the little plastics plant over in Olive, in the Butler Industrial Park there, which is the main Olive yard. The switching out of that industry occurs very early in the morning, relatively speaking. It occurs at like 8 o'clock, because it uses the empty car that is brought in on the freight train, that, the one that actually is programmed currently to come through. So it uses that, which means, as a consequence, it gets there really early. So it doesn't have the whole day to build up. And, because I want to just sort of get it out of the way when I have the opportunity, it may not be the most realistic thing, but it's been filling up that car that's been sitting there for 24 hours. Asterisk. That's not how it works in trains, but that's how we're making it work. It's been filling up that car for 24 hours, so the engine goes over there and it takes out the full car and it puts in the empty one. But the empty one does not take 24 hours to fill because, like I said, that is not how trains works. Trains automatically insta-fill stuff the moment you put it on the industry. So, instead of having it insta-fill later, when you go to pick it up or whatever, it has enough plastic pellets for one carload, which is how much it makes in a day. Amazing. So, we've got the plastic pellets now, which are there. They are, one full carload of plastic pellets that it produces per day, because it had one in waiting, it had one in the chamber, and it had a whole carload full of them sitting there. And so you go and you pick up the full carload, which would have been filled at the same time the previous day. You drop off the empty car, boom, it magically fills up, but then you leave it there for the next 24 hours and come back for it later. As if it has taken the entire day to fill up. Magical, right? It's amazing what you can do with the power of something. But that's the gist of where I'm at with all this AI stuff. I'm making forays into having them switch some of the simpler stuff. I'm really just trying to juggle a lot of stuff at once. I was totally stymied the other night before I started making my railcar counting spreadsheet, because I just didn't know what had to go where, and I was afraid. I was afraid to delete stuff in the yard because I figured we'd need it. I was afraid to program some trains because I wasn't sure what they would be carrying, and I'm still not sure for most of it. But as long as I keep the stuff that I need right now at the front of the AI trains, then I shouldn't have that much of a problem. I'll maybe have to change some uncoupling stuff later, but overall that doesn't really matter, and it's going to be stuff that, okay, yeah, you'll get programmed when you go to the next area that isn't built yet. Then I'll have to program you for that area, and I'll have to deal with whatever I did to you in this current area, but that's going to be, that's going to hold true no matter what. So I might as well just build a placeholder train behind the cars that I actually need to bring in, and then change it out later when it actually matters, because that is not a lot of work. I am leery of any situation which has me program a train that I'm not going to use, but the train's program in this case would not change. So, yeah, I think I've reached a good point to do that, to move forward with that, and I may hesitate for a little while longer now that I am where I am, because, like I said, I can't have any more trains coming in from off-map to the south, or west, or east, There is no west right now. Wait a minute. No, I mean the west. I meant the west. I can't have any trains coming from there because, to wrap back around to the very beginning of the episode, I've got nowhere to put them. I've got nowhere to have them come from, and I'm not going to build a ghetto staging yard of just a couple of tracks sitting on grid that I'm going to have to tear up and move later. It's not worth it to me. I would rather spend that time doing this so that I can actually get towards the area that those trains would be coming from. Because that actually matters. The AI stuff doesn't really matter a whole lot, although it is, alleviating me from doing a lot of work later by doing a little work now, relatively speaking. But I don't think that, going through the effort to just so I can have more AI right now is a good proposition. It'd be better if I just, held my horses with the AI, did what I need to do, and then moved on, and did the AI when that, did that AI when their time comes. That's important. That's important stuff. I've been rambling about AI this whole time. I mean, that's kind of been my whole freaking life at home these past few days. I've been going out, not going out, but I've been going to work, I've been coming home, and I've been running simulations. And that's been it. That's been it. That's been everything. That's my entire life wrapped up in a nutshell for the past 2 weeks. I mean, when Madison is here and when I have other stuff to do, I just let the Sims run in the background, but I'm still just running simulations. It's, like I said, I have to let it run for a couple of hours before it gets to any part that's interesting. Now that I've set up this interrupt, which will pause it, I can do that at any time. I don't have to be around, so I can get more Sims done in the same period of a few days. But at the same time, the simulations are getting longer, so ideally, with a 3-hour-long simulation, I can only do 4 of those in a 12-hour period, ideally. That's only 8 per day. And if you discover new things every time, progress is slow. The other thing is, when it comes to programming trains, and this is going to get much, much, much worse, and I'm not looking forward to it, when it comes to programming trains, you have to picture a lot in your mind's eye. It has to all be going on in your head, in your imagination, where those cars are going to go and how they're going to get there, and all of these commands. Sometimes I use dummy trains that I just place down on the map, and, to count out cars or whatever, but that's not the real thing, and you're liable to screw it up sometimes. There were a few times where I was adjusting what was going on down at the forestry, because there's some kind of complex maneuvers that go on down there. It's a lot of simple maneuvers, but they're all tied together. They all directly affect one another. And because of that, I had to go through in a very iterative process. I had to do it, change it, do it, change it, do it, change it, do it, change it, do it, change it. For effectively days. Until I got something that worked reliably and did everything that I needed it to do. And then I realized that there was something else that I had to have it do, so I had to start changing it again. And it was at that point that I made a lot of missteps. And I misunderstood my own AI code and started breaking things that had worked just fine previously. So, it's really important to know what you're looking at, and you have to know what you're looking at, and you have to know what areas are going to look like. The switching that the olive yard switcher has to do operates in a lot of cases with cars that aren't in the yard yet at the start of the scenario, or at the very least aren't where they're going to end up. So when I have that engine switching cars that will arrive when the branch line train comes back, the olive branch train comes back, it's totally imaginary. Those cars are not where they are at the beginning of the scenario, as they are, they're not where they're going to be. They're going to be somewhere completely different. It's going to drop the train off on the arrival track, just like a good engine, and then piddle off and go and grab water and then grab another cut of cars and head back out to the olive branch. But the thing is, now we're looking at a yard arrangement that not only is different because the olive branch train came back and dropped a bunch of cars that are new and that were elsewhere previously. It just picked up a bunch of cars and left. So that's, that changes things even more so. You've got a freight train coming in, and you have to sort those hypothetical cars out, navigating around all of the other cars that you've adjusted so far through the course of the session, which at that point in time is actually quite a few, because you have all of the cars that were brought in by the freight train at the beginning of the day. None of those have left by that point. It's about 9 in the morning. None of those have left. Some of them have been switched out, but then you have the empties or the fulls to deal with, which I stashed on one of the tracks, which empties out when the train leaves when the Mason Valley train leaves. That track empties, so I stashed them on that track in the middle. So, now I have to be conscious of the fact that those are there. Some of those have to go in one direction, and some of those have to go in another direction. And so they are one cut. They're sitting in the middle of one of the yard tracks. I need to remember that they're there, and I need to remember what order they're in, so I know which end to come up and take stuff off of when the train finally comes to take them away, whenever that is. So, one of the things that I've considered doing is taking screenshots of the yards, like on the hour marks or at particularly important milestones. Okay, you finished all of the switching operations for this section. Okay, he's going to move on to the other thing, but before he does that, I'm going to take a screenshot of the yard because this is what it's going to look like at this time. That sort of thing. It's really a big deal. It is really vexing. It is really, mind-melting in a lot of cases because you're having to juggle so many variables at once. Plus things that you can't even consider yet. Like the demands of the other nearby towns that are in either different catchment areas or even in the same catchment area, in the same home yard, like Mason's Landing and Mason Valley. Mason's Landing is pretty much worked out, but I haven't put all of the industries in the industry spreadsheet for that yet, so it's still up in the air as to what it actually needs, which I think is at least another car of goods. So that means it's going to be more work for the Mason Valley switcher, or the Mason's Landing switcher, to switch out another goods car off of that train and put it where it belongs, which is at the goods shed there. Oh, there's two of them at least. Yeah, no, I haven't done any of those industries. I've done a little bit of them. I've done them in the game, and I've got them working for the most part. That's a huge asterisk, but working for the most part. And, but otherwise they aren't on my spreadsheets. They effectively don't exist to all my calculations. And they need to, because a lot of those cars are going to or coming from other areas that I don't have listed yet, or that I don't have built yet, but I can still program trains going in that direction, or even in rare cases coming from that direction, with whatever we need, like the 3 a.m. train from Gilson City that has all of the goods on it, which isn't going to be all the goods now that I think about it, because we're going to need more, not just for Mason's Landing, but Mason Valley as well. I don't know. I will probably have a second goods train that comes later in the day that brings more stuff. I don't know, how many cars I really should be towing behind that one Berkshire. I don't want things to look too unrealistic, but I don't want to clutter up the system with too many trains either. There are lots of feats of engines pulling absurd numbers of cars, but on a regular basis, I don't know. Okay, so while we're doing the AI thing, I think we did a pretty good job of filling in a nice chunk here. So we filled in like this area today, which, taking a bite out of crime, so to speak. And we also did a lot of the, that scenery or that texturing around here, and we did some area up here. So that's not bad for the time that we spent benchmarking based on last episode. So let's do something a little bit outside of the norm. So we've got 10 minutes, and I think in this 10 minutes I'm going to look at making the interlocking tower for for the tram line, just as a whole. And I'm going to put it right here because these things are invisible. And we need to name all these, so what are we going to call them? Tram junction, let's call it ML Tram TL. And then this is going to be, out. ML Tram TL out, and this is going to be ML Tram TL in. Yeah. It's going to be ML Tram TR out. ML Tram TR in. ML Tram RL, so right left. I motioned the wrong way when I did that. You guys couldn't see that, but I did. I don't know my rights and lefts. This is going to be out. Yeah, it's an out. And this is a ML Tram TR LR in. So the thing we need is signals, because interlocking towers cannot survive properly without signals. I've been using these to some avail. They've been kind of a pain in the butt when dealing with the turntables, but on the whole, it's not that big of a deal. As long as they work as signals, which they do, that's all we're concerned about. So we're going to place these like this. And the ideal here is to create a junction which allows trams to go through and not interfere with one another. So we'll call this ML Tram. This is the north leg. North in. This is ML Tram north out. ML Tram east out. ML Tram east in. This is my favorite little pet project right now. Tram south in. So, okay, now we have it. And let's rename this. So this is going to be the ML Tram Tower. Or we'll just call it ML Tram. Don't do that. Yes, requery. Do static ownership because nobody's going to be throwing these on their own, I hope. Hey, you know what? Let's just do dynamic ownership, because why not? No debugging, TRC compatibility off, because I'm not using TRC right now. No paths defined for this tower. Alright, let's add some paths. ML Tram East in. Yep. I'm only going to do things from the in. Restore chosen pass cleared. Clear on cancel. Yeah, that's what I want to do. Assignment. Players only. Automatic players only. Yeah, this is fine. The other thing is, so what we're going to have to do, this is going to have to be set to automatic. And I also have to, and this is where it gets tricky, although what's the other thing that I can do? I can exclusive sets membership. That's right. I can make this you can only do this, this, and this. It's supposed to give an example. Separated by a semicolon. Let's see. Oh, you know what? I don't think I can do that because we only have one thing. Also, why does this say that? Okay, so back to path list. Let's add another one. ML tram. Let's just do the east ones first while we're here. This is going to be set to automatic. Oops. Automatic. This is going to be automatic players only. This is the only difference. It's going to go that way. Okay, you know what? I think I get it. This is going to be left turns. I think I'll just call it left. And then this is going to be outer. It's going to be outer, it's also going to be right. So those two can't go together. Add ML tram north in. Now, so this is straight through. Players only. State is going to be automatic. I don't know why this wouldn't be. Oh, because that's a straight ahead signal. Yeah, that one's going to be automatic too. Yeah, that's fine, that's fine, that's fine. Let's add this. This is going to be outer. Straight. And this one is also part of... No. This one is also part of outer. Because those two can go together. The three that are going to be outer are going to be that one, and that one. Straight are going to be these two. Left are going to be these two. And then right are going to be these two. I'm not sure if you can see that against all that white, but, you know. There are only going to be 6 total paths, so ML tram. These are like the only switches on the entire tram, too. Assignment. Automatic players only. Full automatic. That's automatic. Exclusive sets. This is going to be right. It isn't in any other sets. Add one more. ML tram north in. Whoops, south in. There we go. Which one is this? This is going to be part of outer. Outer. And it's also going to be part of left. I don't actually know what exclusive sets does in totality. I'm just not entirely certain. Oh, you know what? Maybe I should be doing it the other way around. Yeah, I'm doing it the other way. I'm doing it wrong. I'm doing it backwards, huh? I need to figure that out. Let me just get rid of all of these because I'm definitely doing them backwards. That just occurred to me. It's exclusive, not whatever the opposite of that is. Inclusive. Inclusive does not sound appropriate for what I'm talking about here. It's inclusive is for, like, you know, Mediterranean trips. Okay, so you're gonna go straight. You're gonna go automatic. You're gonna go players only, and then yeah. So that doesn't need a sets membership. What it does need is, okay, so the ones that need a sets membership are the ones that cross the middle, and that's right. So cross. This one, oh, that one doesn't cross the middle. Never mind. No, my mistake. This one, I think. Yeah, cross. So you can only have one of these at a time. This doesn't matter. Because that will be taking over the switch. It's only if you have a train going like that and a train going like that. And by train, I mean tram. Or trolley. It's going to be the other one on cross. I think there are only 3 cross members now. Right? There should only be 3. So this one has nothing. This one has cross, because that's what it's doing. This one has nothing. This one has cross, because that's what it's doing. And then this one has nothing. And this one should have cross. Right? Yes. I mean, it's the only one left. It has to. So, I believe then only one of those can be activated at a time. Now, I don't have a way to test this right now because the tram tracks aren't hooked up to anything, but now that we have this, this is the beginning of something. And by something, I mean that we're going to have to do railroad crossings for this. We're going to have to do another one down there with the bridge and everything. This is going to control basically everything cool for the entire Valley line. So it's going to control that. It's going to control the railroad crossing down here. It's going to control the swing bridge. And it's going to control any other major interlockings that go on with the tram. So, anyway, I hope we all learned something. I hope I just learned something. I hope I wasn't wrong with what I was thinking. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you next week. Trainman out.